Good morning. My name is Bruce Douglas. I'm the Director of Communications and Business at Eurelectric, and delighted to welcome you all to this Eurelectric webinar on equality, shaping an inclusive energy transition. Thank you all for joining. We have almost 500 participants online from across Europe. But before we start, I have some brief housekeeping points. We encourage you to ask questions during the webinar using the question button on the top right. You see it there on your screen now. They will be posed to the presenters during the panel discussion. Now, this webinar is part of the launch events related to a study Eurelectric have carried out with Guidehouse and Cambridge Econometrics with scientific contribution from Enel Foundation. The report is now available for download from the Eurelectric website, and please do help us disseminate this critical study using the hashtag #It'sElectric and equality. So, what does it say? Well, the study concludes that climate policies are likely to impact harder on the low-income population in the short term, unless they are accompanied by targeted mitigating measures. The study also outlines several remedial solutions that could be considered to cushion the effects on vulnerable households while ensuring sustainable growth for the benefit of all. So the main conclusion and takeaway: targeted policies can neutralize negative social impacts of the energy transition. So this morning we have a great lineup of high-level speakers and a packed agenda. So let's dive straight in with our first speaker. And I'm delighted to introduce Magnus Hall, joining us from Sweden today. Magnus, do please turn your video and mic on. Magnus is the President of Eurelectric and the President and CEO of Vattenfall AB. Thanks very much, Magnus, and over to you.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Bruce. And from my side, also a very warm welcome to this webinar today, where I think we're going to cover a very important and interesting subject, and where we want to share our views on how this could be done in a better way. If you look to Eurelectric, we are extremely committed to be able to participate and make a fossil-free world possible. We have prioritized 3 areas which we believe are important to make this happen. First of all, of course, we are electricity producers, and we truly believe in electrification as a means to fight climate change. It's to transportation, electrification of transportation, electrification of industry, and electrification of heating. But if we are going to be able to do that, we also have to, of course, decarbonize electricity. So that's the second priority that we have. But in this transition, if we're going to be successful, we have to have what we call a just transition. And that's the third priority we want to look at. That means that areas in Europe are going to change in terms of how they produce energy. We need to help them. We also need to make sure that we help consumers to go through this change with hope for the future, let's say like that. And that's really where this study that we have today, and which I'm very happy to launch, plays a big role. We do have a big political debate right now around recovery packages, where we are looking to, of course, combine a recovery, but also with a strong green policy, the European Green Deal, and we want to, at the same time, limit the effect of the vulnerable households to make this happen. And that's really what this study is about. So the reason why we have done this is quite simple. Decarbonizing Europe cannot happen without the acceptance and support of citizens. If we will succeed in our policies, we have to succeed for all of them. We have to make it very broad. So if you look to our members, the Eurelectric members are very keen to understand how these diverse households and their diverse budgets can actually be impacted from decarbonization policies. And even more important, how can we act to avoid these negative effects? And the current debate on the transition is very critical. But it's a key element, of course, is to look how these distributional effects work. So we will take this new analysis. We want to contribute to the discussion on social acceptance for a revived green economy in Europe. And I'm therefore also very happy that in this discussion today, we will have the European Commissioner for Energy, Kadri Simpson, sharing her insights with us later in the discussion. The good news is that the study actually shows that there are ways that we can combine climate policies and mitigating what we call the regressive effects, which means that we should not make societal differences bigger, but smaller. We believe there are ways, and we want to inspire this discussion by this study. Reaching this equilibrium, we believe, will depend on the political and regulatory environment of every member state, of course. But the analysis we have developed has several options that member states and the EU can draw from in its discussion. And I'm looking forward to have Mr. Papa's deeper presentation from the Enel Foundation on how that can actually be developed. So this new report will serve Eurelectric to participate in an open, constructive debate where we want to invite national policymakers, industry representatives, consumer citizens on the importance of understanding how we can mitigate those distributional effects and actually make the energy transition possible to a fossil-free society, which is one of the most important things of our society today. Of course, the virus question is the most important question right now, but when we have that under control, the next question will be how we deal with climate change. And with that, a very warm welcome to everybody to this webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Magnus, for setting the scene. And we are delighted now to welcome the keynote speaker, Kadri Simpson, Energy Commissioner at the European Commission, joining us from just up the road here in Brussels today at the European Commission's headquarters, Berlaymont building. Great to see you, Commissioner. Thank you so much for joining us, especially during the European Sustainable Energy Week and these busy weeks when you are preparing the strategy for energy system integration, which will be launched on the 8th of July. Very much looking forward to that too. So please, over to you, Commissioner, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on the inclusive energy transition. Thank you so much. We just can't hear. Could you unmute yourself?
A second attempt. Is it now better?
Perfect. Thank
okay,
you very
good.
much.
I'm using my iPad, and this is not well usual way how we work here, but different platforms do have different requirements. But good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And first of all, I wish to thank Eurelectric for hosting this timely event. Exactly in the week that they concentrated of discussions around sustainable energy solutions for a greener and fairer Europe. And going digital will mark this week and also this year. And I'm most grateful to the Commission's key partners, experts and stakeholders for making such relevant events as ours today possible. So the pandemic has not only affected our events, it also radically changed the EU policy landscape with a strong focus on what is now most urgent, supporting the recovery of the European economy and of course for the benefits of our citizens. So I want to assure you that the citizens, households and regions and also the ones that are most affected by the transition shall be at the center of the EU strategy for the recovery. We are all very excited to hear more about the results of the study presented today, and I very much appreciate all expert advice on the decarbonization policies that Europe needs to achieve. We need those advices to achieve our energy and climate goals, and importantly, our study looks into the impact of different policy options in promoting a fair access for all people to the benefits of the transition. At the same time, we know that some policies might entail a risk of greater inequalities, and these risks need to be managed. In the Commission, it is our responsibility to make sure that new ambitions do not come at the cost of people, but that they actively contribute to combating inequality across Europe. And today we are discussing how our existing and new policies can ensure that no one is disproportionately affected and least of all left behind. Already we have a number of initiatives that are pushing us in this direction. First, the Clean Energy for All Europeans legislative package. This is unprecedented in its commitment to empower consumers and protect vulnerable customers in order to prevent inequalities that would otherwise peak across Europe. It lowers the cost of every person by promoting competitive electricity prices and a competitive electricity market to deliver the best price and energy efficiency. We know that households with different budgets are impacted differently and unevenly, and it works in favor of our societies to support those affected. The package insists on the fight against energy poverty. It is acknowledged that in identification of households most in need of protection helps targeting public interventions. To do the best we can for our consumers, we need to keep in mind that several aspects of energy policy are closely interlinked. That goes for increasing energy efficiency, focusing public expenditure, and minimizing any distortions in the functioning of the internal energy market. For the engagement of the member states, there are similarly several instruments at our disposal. The national energy and climate plans and the long-term renovation strategies reinforce both decarbonization and recovery. And these plans and strategies are directly linked to the European semester, just transition plans and other drivers of transition. Today, these plans reinforce each other and determine the targets of national recovery and resilience plans under the Next Generation EU. Second, specifically the Just Transition mechanism is central to any debate surrounding the fairness aspects in becoming the climate neutral continent. In our package of measures for recovery, the Commission proposed to strengthen the Just Transition Fund up to 40 billion. And this demonstrates just how committed the EU is in leaving no one behind during this transition. The mechanism will be central to enabling more diversified and decarbonized European economies and in supporting local communities to thrive. Third, specifically when it comes to energy efficiency measures, the Commission's renovation wave will be the key enabler of affordability for households through energy consumption savings and of reduced emissions for a greener environment. Increasing renovation rates is a challenge. Even so, the results are without a doubt worth it. Not only does it lower energy bills, it reduces energy poverty and improves living conditions. It will also boost the construction sector and is an opportunity to support SMEs and local jobs. Because of those strong links, the renovation wave will be complemented by Commission's energy poverty guidance to assist member states in identifying households at risk of energy poverty and developing effective strategies for supporting them as a matter of priority. And the Commission will continue supporting the exchange of good practices between member states. Meanwhile, EU financing and other forms of support, including through the platforms provided by the European Energy Poverty Observatory and the Covenant of Mayors initiative, can be mobilized to address the challenges identified. Finally, one more significant EU initiative is worth mentioning as a force to not only involve our citizens fully in the transition, but also to help them take ownership of it. The Commission will launch the European Climate Pact, which aims at engaging citizens in the transition by linking them with decision making at all government levels and improving their knowledge of energy and climate to empower them to act. Altogether, in all these efforts, our focus must indeed be on people and households to understand the impact of policies on families' budgets. The pandemic has made us realize how vulnerable we are as a society. We shall keep this in mind as we work towards the clean energy transition. So we have to work with the people and for the people. If I could leave you today with one message, it is by investing in future-oriented sectors such as clean energy, energy efficiency, and circular economy, we are building a more sustainable, resilient economy, better equipped to face future shocks. And we must commit to doing this by putting households and ultimately each and every one of our citizens first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your positive and valuable comments on the inclusive energy transition and the fight against energy poverty. Really welcome at this time. We do hope you'll be able to join us for the panel discussion just after the presentation of the study, which comes up now. Thank you so much. We'll see you again very shortly. So now over to the presentation, and we're delighted to welcome Carlo Papa, who is the Managing Director of Enel Foundation, joining us today from Rome. Carlo, could you turn on your video and your mic, please? Thank you. And thank you, Carlo, for your support and scientific contribution of the Enel Foundation. Extremely valuable, and we look forward to your presentation of the study. Over to you. We can't hear you, Carlo. Could you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm trying it. Can you hear me?
That's it. Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for having me here, and thank you to the Commissioner for kind words that are guiding our work going forward and have mainly guided our study. And thank you to Eurelectric and all the partners in our project. We actually enjoyed very much working together, and thank you very much to all of you that are listening to us today, and you are ready to reflect together on the possibility that we have for Europe to win the race to a clean and resilient energy future, being an example for the world, and in this case, looking specifically at an indispensable tool of policy as a tool to ensure success. So if we can go to the next slide. We all know that in the last quarters, locked in our
hello, Carlo. For some reason, we can't hear you anymore. Could you just check your sound? Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah, we can hear you again. Thank you.
It seems from remotely someone is switching on and off, but okay, we are set. So I was saying that in the last quarter, we have reflected on many things being locked up in our houses. And one of the things on which many of us has reflected is that we either stand together as a society or we fall together, whatever is the COVID crisis or the climate change or the challenge to ensure a sustainable future for all. And it's important to have this in mind because I put on purpose this cover of The Economist that was pretending last year that inequality is an illusion. Actually, we have learned very clearly that inequality is not an illusion. You have seen the COVID crisis probably hitting harder on the less wealth part of our society. And next, please. We have also learned that climate change is not more a debatable item. It's an issue on the table that is shaping, a new normal. Next, please. And this new normal, characterized by climate change and inequality, even during the COVID, has shown that how important is the issue of climate change. Next, please. And because it's actually eating human beings as climate change, and the energy transition can be a solution and can lower the pressure, next please, not only on our planet, but also on human being in terms of pollution and other, negative effects that we have on the planet and on ourselves. Next, please. So the study that we conducted together with our colleagues at Eurelectric and the wonderful job the Guidehouse and Cambridge Econometrics have done with our team has essentially 4 elements. The first one is a comprehensive approach. By this, we mean that we both worked on economic modeling of policy, but we have also looked at a lesson learned from programs that were put in place in the last years and even more recently, with one aim, looking at a possible combination of environmental policy, decarbonization policy, that can help us to reach, as European Union, 95% of CO2 reduction by 2015. Now, you know how ambitious is this target, but you also know that some of us think that we should do faster. And you know that in the entire world, there are countries who are not following European example in the same way. So it's important to state that we wish this suggestion to bring us to a CO2 free or nearly free Europe by 2015. In terms of activities that we have done, we have analyzed 6 key policies one by one and their impact on economy, jobs, and inequality, having in mind that strong inequality will definitely undermine in the short and long term strong economy. And we have looked at all the region in Europe. As I said, we have done a reality check by looking at real life example. And finally, we think we have found a bouquet of policy that we can suggest to the European politician to adopt to make sure this energy transition benefit all the citizens. Next slide, please. In the course of the study, we have looked at this index. Most of you will remember from your study at university that the Gini index that was designed by an Italian statistician at the beginning of last century gives as a proxy of the wealth distribution in a society, in a country, in an entire continent. So by monitoring these coefficients, we have looked at next, please, at the impact of the various decarbonization policy, taking those one by one. This is not because in real life you should take policy one by one, because the study is suggesting exactly the opposite. We should look at the entire package of policy, but it's important to analyze the economic effect of each and every one so that we can see, next please, for example, carbon pricing as a regressive effect on wealth distribution. Next please. And while, for example, energy efficiency has a progressive effective effect on energy distribution. This clearly doesn't mean that there are good policy or bad policy. It means that policy should be measured, policy effects should be measured in a very precise way to make sure that we Next slide, please. I know it's going off and on. I don't know why. I was saying that there are regressive policy like carbon price or progressive policy like energy efficiency measure. And this doesn't mean that there are good or bad policy, but it means that we should take into consideration the policy effect by one in order to combining them properly. Now, clearly analyzing policy without analyzing what the government can do with the monies that are collected from those policies, it's just, for the sake of the exercise. So once the government has gaining this amount of money, we should look at the way those money can be invested. And we analyze, what we call the revenue balancing as a standard tool, or looking at, for example, working on balancing, wealth through VAT. And clearly, for every one of you that has studied economics, but it's very intuitive that rather than working on income taxes if we work on VAT, so on expenses, people will be better off, and the Gini index will actually have a positive effect. So wealth distribution will be proper. Next, please. Next. Next. So we look at different cases. Clearly, we have the Swedish example that since the 90s are working on reduction on VAT and electricity bills in order to make sure that all the households benefit from the energy transition. We have programs such as the one in Scotland that is not thinking about taxes, but is considering the possibility to retrain workers that are coming from industry that are negatively impacted by energy transition, such as oil and gas. And there are other situations like the compensation funds and the lump sum transfer that have been done both in Canada and US. Lately, because it's brand new, we analyze what is happening in Italy right now in terms of energy efficiency scheme and the possibility to have an eco bonus that is essentially a rebate on tax reduction based on the amount of energy efficiency investment that an household will do. And those are all very important attempts to reach, an equitable energy transition for all, and good example in planning the way ahead. Go ahead, please. Next. Next. Okay. Next. So thinking at the busy UN officials and all the debate that is going on in the European Union, we tried to select four, next please, four effective policy that blended together can ensure the Gini index goes in the right way. So reducing the wealth difference between citizens in Europe. And there are four pillars, next please, one of which is the lump sum transfer of money, or better probably the reduction, the lowering of VAT taxes in order to reduce the expense on energy. Then we have the energy efficiency measure that clearly from the kind word of the commissioner, all of us has in mind. And finally, we have two other elements that are looking at the future of people, that is long-term job retraining programs for people that actually are in industry that are phasing out from the value chain of energy, and the importance to support new technologies. We know that subsidies is a debatable issue. Sometimes we have gone too far in subsidies, but yet subsidies of low carbon technology are an element that can ensure the future of technology such as the marine energy that can eventually contribute to the energy mix of Europe in a very heavily way. So combining these four policy together, we have looked at the impact again on inequality, jobs, and economy. Next, please. Okay. And we actually have seen that all the negative effects that we have seen before analyzing policy by policy can actually go away. You see the green bar and the effect on the Gini index. So we will ensure less inequality by combining this policy option. And clearly, this study has started well before the COVID crisis. Next, please. So we have asked ourselves if the COVID in some shape or form would have changed our conclusion, the conclusion of our study. Actually, there is a slightly each back of the COVID, but even in this case, the combination of policy that we selected ensure more equality for citizens around Europe. Next, please. And clearly, we are not talking only about Gini index, because probably most of the people you talk to don't know exactly what Gini index means, but it's an important driver. So we have looked at GDP and employment, and both those two dimensions have been in our modeling positive impacted by this blend of policy. Clearly, you see the effect in this chart, and you can see the details in our study. Next, please. And what is important, I mean, as much is important, don't create imbalancing within a single society, within a single country. It's important that we do not create imbalancing within Europe at large. So we have analyzed the effect on all the EU region of this foreign policy, and as you can see from the graph, the effect has been definitely progressive. That, I remind all of you, means it's good for the people, it's good for each and every one of us in all the European region. Next, please. Okay, so with this, I mean, I will finish my presentation. Remind all of you that you know, all the details are in the study, but in the website of Eurelectric and Enel Foundation as well. And more than likely, we will be more than happy to continue our dialogue with all the people that are listening, because it's important not only, you know, showcase those slides, but go in deep and understanding what does it mean in our everyday life, implementing those suggestions and supporting the politicians that are guiding us to implementing those suggestions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlo. Thank you very much for the extremely clear presentation. And we've actually got a couple of questions coming in already. If you don't mind, I'll ask them to you directly.
Please.
The first one, and it's a good one. It's, you know, it's really what is the biggest takeaway, I suppose. I mean, the question is, what is the greatest learning from the study, and how do you think it could translate in practice?
Yeah, I think the best takeaway is can be wrapped up in one word, that is convergence. I mean, to win a sustainable planet, to reach a sustainable planet, we need convergence between each and every one of us. So we don't need to forget in deciding policy or in suggesting, you know, things to do for our society, that our society is composed by many people, from the people who are actually providing our bread to the people providing our electricity even during crisis. So we should look at solutions that are for the entire society. The second is convergence between companies and government. You know, rather than lobby, we should, as the president of Eurelectric say, debate and discuss in an unbiased way which are the solutions, without forgetting everyone. And the third element of convergence is between the institutions. So we are very much happy to have worked with Eurelectric, to have worked again with Cambridge Econometrics and Guidehouse, because each one in our own you know, activities, if we converge towards a sustainable development, our voice can be heard in an easier way.
Very good, thank you. And maybe time for one more quick question. It's more specific on energy efficiency. Energy efficiency being a key to decarbonization. Often hindered by big barriers of upfront investments. How does the study suggest to remove this barrier, especially for low-income people?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we know by the modeling that energy efficiency is good. We know by looking at the Italian and Swedish example that is doable. So to reduce the investment up front, for example, by creating an offset on your taxes, so the money you should invest are the same, but rather than going directly to the government, we go in energy efficiency. But I think we should remember what a good friend of Enel Foundation, Professor Emory Lowens, always say about the megawatt hours. So the kilowatt hours that is actually not produced, that is the only byproduct of energy efficiency. He says since 20 years now, it's wealth. Meaning that if you reduce your expenses for energy bills, you will be better off and having money for something else. But also we can add that it's health, because by producing less electricity and consuming less electricity, or having an house that is properly warmed or properly cooled, we will live better, and the people living in the house will have an healthier life. So energy efficiency is the name of the game, together with convergence.
Very good. Good words to leave us with, Carlo. Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for Enel Foundation's contribution over the last few months. So now we're going to move on to the panel discussion. I hand over the moderation for the panel debate to Nina Chesney, who is the head of EMEA Power, Gas, Coal and Carbon at Reuters News. She's joining us today from London. Nina, could you turn your video and mic on? And as you do that, I will ask the panelists on the debate to also turn their videos and mics on, and I hand over to you, Nina, to introduce them and moderate the discussion. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Bruce. Good morning, everyone. Morning from London. I'll just wait for the panelists to put their, yeah, we're all there. Is Nils there?
I am there.
Ah, okay. Okay, thank you very much, Bruce, and everyone so far for presentations on the actual report itself. I will give a brief outline of the speakers that we have today, and then we will move into some targeted questions to each one, and then I will open up the floor to questions from participants. So, as Bruce said, I am Nina Chesney. I'm the head of Power, Gas, Coal and Carbon at Reuters News for Europe, Middle East and Africa. So everything except oil, basically. In fact, I've covered the EU emissions trading system for quite a long time and also covered climate change. So if I go first to Niels Fuglsang, who is member of the European Parliament for Denmark. He has also a place on the ITRE and Econ committees in Brussels. Welcome. And we also have Monique Goyen at consumer organisation BUIC. The organisation represents 45 independent national consumer associations across 32 European countries and acts as a strong consumer voice in Brussels. We also have Christian Ruby, who is Eurelectric Secretary General since 2017. He has also previously held a position at Wind Europe as part of the executive management team there. And we have Kadri Simpson, of course, EU Commissioner for Energy, and George Zachman, who is at Bruegel, European Economic Think Tank. His work focuses on energy and climate change issues and has worked on the EU ETS, European electricity market, and European renewables policy. So if we kick off with some couple of questions to George Zachman, first of all, if that's okay, George, if you can unmute.
Sure.
Okay. So George, in your work at Bruegel, which obviously it was one of the first think tanks which carried out a study on the distributional effects of climate policies, obviously that's been quite a long while going on. And do you really think the topic is gaining the attention it deserves by policymakers?
That's a good question. The topic was moving up the agenda since 2018 with the Yellow Vests movement, but obviously, given the current situation on the health and general economic issues, are now more in the spotlight. But still, even now, the discussion on recovery policies entail much more emphasis on distributional and climate concerns than, say, in 2008 and 2009 crisis. But we need to be very careful and work hard to make sure that these statements about green and just recovery are not just lip service, but that they are actually being carried through in real policies. And what's very important is that that there are still visible gaps that we would see here, and they're both research gaps. There's very few analysis out there that look into the different impact of climate policies on different households, and therefore it's very good to have this report because it explicitly looks into these effects. But there are also still significant policy gaps, policy design gaps. So we have currently already a lot of climate policies out there that have significant distributional effects, and we might want to look into those policies that we currently have again. So, for example, we calculated that the emission trading system had something like 30 billion of windfall profits for producers. That electricity market designs, for example, households spend very different amounts of money depending on whether they are small or big. in different countries. So there are significant distributional effects still there, and we should look a lot into policies going forward, but also try to look into existing policies. And in that sense, it's great to have this report, because it does not only stop at doing a stock take, but discusses remedies to distributional effects.
Thank you. On obviously, we have to have an international approach in order to make domestic policies fairer. What kind of role do you see for the EU in this?
That's quite a challenging question, because there's currently a significant discussion on measures to protect against carbon leakage. And the argument there is about losing competitiveness. The problem is that those policies tend to be quite regressive. So if you try to protect against carbon leakage, you might end up in a situation like in the like with tax havens, that you try to reduce the burden on those factors, in this case, emission-intensive production, and at the same time, you have to increase the burden on those factors that cannot move, so the population. And just to give you one example from my country, we currently have a discussion here in Germany on carbon border adjustment measures, and the discussion goes to combine essentially free allowances and the ETS with an additional carbon consumption tax. So what that will do will essentially, you will have again industry that might pass through both the carbon tax and the allowance price. Households will essentially pay twice for emissions, and industry in the end will get a windfall. So we need to be very, very careful that if we design any border protection measures, that we don't end up in such a trap. And moreover, I agree. I mean, there is this risk of carbon leakage, or this discussion around that. And typically policies against that are regressive. So we need to put a lot of effort to encourage international decarbonization efforts in order to make sure that we don't have to put up distortionary protective tools. So if you have to focus political capital on one thing or the other, try to focus as much as possible on the international decarbonization.
We're not hearing you, Nina.
Yeah, Nina, could you just unmute yourself? No, we still can't hear you. Could the back office please try and unmute her? No. Okay. So while we try and fix Nina's sound, I will take over the moderation role. The next question actually was to Christian. Thanks, Jörg, for your interventions. So Christian, the findings of the study suggest that mitigating measures will need to be carefully adapted to national needs. Why is it so?
Well, I think it's very clear that we have a role of policy at EU level. We also, when we look at those measures that are being discussed in the report, whether it's lump sum transfers or adjustments to tax regimes, adjustments to VAT, you see that we're deep into national legislation. That means that you know, you really want to know the system that you're tweaking before you turn the knobs. So we really we're careful in this study to say there's stuff you can do at EU level, but there's also a number of things that need to be done at member state level. And here, rather than saying one size fits all, we're saying here's some ideas and look at the national situation so that you find out a way that actually works. I know in my country, we've had the debates on how to help households basically phase out their boilers, fossil fuel boilers. And again, this needs to be carefully crafted along everything else that's going on in terms of taxes, levies, and other measures. If you allow, I'd just make one comment to what was mentioned by Georg, because it's clear that there is the EU level versus the member state level, but there's also very different sectorial impacts, if you will, and effects at play here. If you look at, for example, the border carbon adjustment that was just mentioned, if you look at the energy intensive sectors, indeed you can get some very tricky interplay between allowances, taxes, etc. On the other hand, if you look at electricity, well, we have this situation now that we have a very, very accelerated energy transition in Europe, where the high carbon assets are being decommissioned at very high pace. They also happen to be the ones that handle the backup and the baseload production. So now we see increased imports of coal electricity from Morocco, from Bosnia and Herzegovina, from Russia, for example. Now, the good thing about looking at this in the electricity sector, the border and carbon adjustment, is that we actually have a very, very transparent system in place with the ETS. And the first thing we could do is to make sure that the carbon price is paid by those exporting coal electricity to the EU. That would actually give a revenue to the EU and could thus help the overall situation, and at the same time be implemented in a fairly transparent and uniform way.
Thanks a lot, Christian. And apologies again for the technology. Nina is trying to fix her audio. This is another part of the new normal, having to interact with technology much more. A second quick question to you, Christian, before we come to the Commissioner to follow up on what you've said. So you represent the power sector. I mean, what do you think the role of the power sector is in this whole debate?
Well, I think that we are here to be an informed discussion participant and to basically raise issues that we see directly as a consequence of the energy transition in our sector, because we have to be very straight, looking at the coal miners, looking at the people in regions that are highly dependent on different types of high carbon assets and production. There are effects that we need to handle. Otherwise, we won't have the buy-in for the energy transition that is needed to carry out this enormous project that we very wholeheartedly support. So we're here to raise some of these issues and also contribute with some insights of how this could be fixed at EU level, at regional level, member state level, but also at the very individual level for individual consumers. And I want to say that we have to give this commission actually credit for taking the just transition agenda seriously. 1 year ago, I said to Mr. Cañete, the former commissioner, congratulations with all the work you've done on the clean energy package. What about the just transition? And we have to remember that just 1 year ago, there was no just transition fund foreseen in the EU budget, not at all, not a single budget line. And the message was, oh, maybe a good idea outside my scope, and I'm going out. This commission took it very seriously, started by putting a clear fund in place, and now it has also ramped up this fund very significantly, and we really welcome this because it's needed. So I do think that there are clear signs. This commission takes the just transition agenda very seriously and is trying to basically put in place the relevant policies. Next step is to combine these policies at EU level with the needed measures in member states.
Thanks a lot, Christian. I see, Nina, you've rejoined us. Can we check your audio? Yeah, no, sorry, we still can't hear you. I assume you can hear me because you're trying. No, okay. So I will place the next question to the Commissioner. Nina, and we'll try and fix your audio. Apologies for that, but we will move on. So Commissioner, again, thanks again for your time this morning. Really appreciate you being here. And going to what Christian said about, the Commission's role and policymakers' role generally. The Green Deal you mentioned, coupled with the recovery plan, are great opportunities for policymakers to shape the energy transition in a way that citizens feel involved. What opportunities do you see for the Commission specifically to tackle these challenges of distribution effects in this context? Thank you.
Let's hope that I'm unmuted. Yeah, good.
We can hear you.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank for this good comment on our policies, and this is really so that just transition is important for us. And well, during those spring months, our first actions from Commission side were also how to help people all across Europe who had under the risk to lose their jobs. So there were short emergency measures. Most known of those is this SURE initiative that was just emergency funding for workers. Now, in the long term, of course, we want to achieve the situation where we have strong public support for our biggest goal to become climate neutral by 2050. And we will have support only if we do have measures that will create affordable energy prices. But we are not working only towards better prices, but also towards energy efficiency. So this principle, energy efficiency first, is still very valid. And after 2 weeks, we will present one of the first initiatives. This is energy system integration that helps us to use existing energy more wisely, so that we can, for example, replace fossil fuel heat with the existing heat that is right now just residue or waste heat. We will also work towards the exact regions that are right now heavily dependent on mining or that are carbon intensive industry regions. The Just Transition Fund that is now 40 billion euros big will help those regions, being all the regions, they themselves have to discuss where will they use the money, but reskilling is one of the options. And also creating new opportunities for consumers to be more active. So this consumer participation in the energy system, so that member states should have different provisions in the national law with respect of taxes and levies for individual and joint acting customers. Well, this is also part of our proposals. So I will not use more time because otherwise other participants will have no chance to participate. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. But just before we move on to the others, the renovation wave is a critical part of your package and indeed probably a flagship of that. How can you address energy poverty within that renovation wave? How do you see that being a key part linked to this debate?
Well, indeed, in this autumn, we will propose a renovation wave initiative. I just had a energy council together with all the energy ministers across EU, and this is an initiative that is strongly supported because it helps us to use, well, after the renovation, you can keep comfortable temperature inside your house, but using for that less energy. That means that consumers will have smaller heating bills. And it ticks also the box that we want to create new jobs all across Europe. So there are buildings everywhere that need renovation, and that most probably will stay around also after the 2050. So with this renovation wave, we try to guide member states so that they will double the rates of renovation, because the majority of the buildings here in Europe were built before the energy efficiency principle became important at all. And we will also propose the additional financing, so that not only grants, but also that we can blend grants with favorable loans. And we do have very good examples all across Europe. There are some cities that are doing excellently. There are some member states who have solved the problem how you can renovate multi-apartment buildings, even if there will be hundreds of different owners, but still they will find a common ground because the saving is so significant after the renovation. So I just had a very good discussion with Commissioner Maria Gabriel that we should also dedicate one of the missions under the research programs, how cities, because well we need on board cities and regions, how they can use funds for research and innovation, so that renovation is not the old school renovation, but gives much bigger benefits. And well,
Thank
in
you
the
very
autumn.
much.
Bruce, can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear.
Nina.
You can hear.
Yeah, we can. Yeah,
Okay.
yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Listen, I'll turn my camera off. You turn yours on, and I'll transfer back to you.
Sorry, I missed the end of what Kadri was saying. So, Bruce, can you just recap on what you asked? Thank you.
Certainly. So, yeah, we discussed about the Green Deal, the recovery plan, the Commission's role there, and the challenge they're taking on distribution effects. We also then moved on to the renovation wave and the work the Commission is doing on that, and how that can affect and improve energy poverty issues. So now back over to you, Nina. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for your patience with a technical problem there. Welcome, Kadri. Nice to speak to you. Some of the mitigating measures that came from the report, the analysis in there, obviously fall under the remit of national competencies, and others are at EU level. So how can the European Commission reconcile those two types of measures in upcoming legislation for, say, in the review of the Energy Taxation Directive?
Thank you, Nina. And well, about those technical difficulties, well, we all have been there. So, different platforms create problems. But about our cooperation with member states, so this is clear that we will not achieve our goals without closely cooperating with our member states. And for that reason, I think that it is very important that our additional financing proposal is strongly linked with national energy and climate plans. So everything that member states planned before the COVID crisis to achieve that 2030 targets will now be supported also from our side. And in addition to that, the member states, each and every member state has to propose just transition plan for the specific regions. So the Just Transition Fund is dedicated for regional activities. Your question actually was about taxation, and this is very true that taxation is the right of the member states. From our side, we do see that, well, for consumers, there are three parts of the final price. So one of them is energy and supply component, another is transmission and distribution fees, and then there are taxes, levies, fees and charges. And earlier I mentioned our first initiative, energy system integration. And we will also issue a guidance to member states to address high charges and levies borne by electricity, and to ensure the consistency of non-energy price components across energy carriers. And I know that we have already started close cooperation with Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni, so that we can propose the revision of the energy taxation directive, so that this will align the taxation of energy products and electricity within EU, and ensure a harmonized taxation of both, also not only electricity price, but also for those solutions that help us to store energy that otherwise would be wasted. For example, we will address the topic of offshore wind, because always onshore grid can't accommodate the production, and we will address one of the possible storage solutions, that is hydrogen, and propose also the measures for the taxation. But well, to conclude, taxation is the right of the member states, and we can only guide and cooperate with them closely. Thank you.
Thank you, Kadri. Obviously, this is an age-old problem on how to reconcile the EU level and national policies. So yes, it'd be interesting to see how that comes about. If we move on to Niels Fuglsang, it'd be interesting to know, Niels, how the debate on the effects of climate policies on citizens are taking shape within the Parliament, in the European Parliament, seeing as you are in the Parliament. Perhaps you could give some insight on that.
Yes, well, thank you, Nina, and thank you to Eurelectric for putting this on the agenda. I think it's a very timely report because indeed, as the former one of the presenters mentioned, Carlo, inequality is not an illusion. We've seen rising inequality for decades, I believe, in all OECD countries, and we have to make sure that this climate transformation will not exacerbate that development. And I think I'm in the Energy Committee in the European Parliament, and from that point of view, I can say that what Kadri has mentioned concerning the recovery package, making sure that we use the recovery package for progressive policies, job reskilling, investments in sustainable transport, sustainable energy, that will certainly have the backing of the ITRE committee as far as I can see. The just transition mechanism is something we have asked for, and we're very happy. I would like to echo Christian Ruby that the Commission is taking this seriously. We had an initial proposal of a just transition fund of 7.5 billion euros, and now with the COVID crisis, the Commission has proposed to expand the fund very much up to 40 billion euros. That is, of course, a way in which the EU can sort of redistribute resources. I mean, redistribution of resources is mainly the task of the member states, but the EU can use the budget here under the Just Transition Mechanism and the recovery package to basically also redistribute and to make sure that the regions that are very vulnerable will also get some support. I can just mention that I was in Poland, invited by the Polish electricity organization PKEE last autumn, and I visited Belchatov. I believe it's Europe's largest lignite coal-fired power plant and mine. They have 10,000 employees there, and I was told by the PKEE that they have maybe 150,000 employees in the coal industry in Poland. Maybe that's even a low number. What are these people going to do? Because we want to close down these coal-fired power plants, and to make sure that we don't get a yellow vest situation, not just in France, but all over Europe, we really have to take this seriously. I can just say from a social democratic point of view, this is my group, we have tried in the European Parliament also to say we want conditionality on the recovery fund, but we don't want the austerity conditionality that we saw after the financial crisis. That was a big mistake as far as we're concerned, that exacerbated inequalities. Now we want green conditionalities, of course, and I think we are many in the European Parliament who would also say we want just transition conditionalities. For example, I mean, if you want these packages, maybe you know, it's fair to demand that you should not be a tax haven, that you should tax your elites also. We cannot live with this situation that the inequality has risen and some multinationals are not paying taxes. Facebook, last time we checked, 0.03% in Europe. And at the same time, we're demanding so much of our citizens. So we would like the EU, the European Union, to put tax havens and the fight against tax havens on the top of the priority. And actually last week, the European Parliament agreed that we should have a special permanent tax haven subcommittee to put this on the agenda. So that would be something important that the European Union could do to try to make sure that those who have most, they also pay their part of the bill.
Sure, and obviously being in Denmark, which has really ambitious climate policies, many of which will affect customers directly and indirectly, how would you address the regressive effects on member state level?
I think that's a very good question, Nina, and I'm not sure we have solved that in Denmark. We have made a pledge that we will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 70% in 2030 compared to 1990. And we have also said that we don't know how to do it yet. It's a man on the moon project, and we have this target and we have pledged to live up to it, and we are finding the solutions as we go ahead. We just made a deal, the government and the parliament 2 days ago, on reducing, I believe, about 4 million tons of CO2, but we need to reduce 20 billion tons. So the things that we've done so far is basically what I think the report would call progressive initiatives. So we invest in energy islands, wind turbines, offshore wind turbines, massively, actually much more than Denmark is going to need, because we want to make power to X and just to make fuel for airplanes and sell that in Europe also. From this, we are doing renovations. We made a deal on spending 4 billion euros on renovating households. So that would also be a progressive initiative. But I think, Nina, that after the summer vacation, I know that after the summer vacation, we have a big task ahead, because we also have to address some of what you would call the regressive initiatives. I mean, we are going to discuss a CO2 tariff after the summer break and find out how that could be arranged. And we have at the same time said that we will reach these 70%, but we will do it in a way, and we have pledged that it will not increase inequality. So how do we do it? And I think the report is very timely, as I mentioned, because I think maybe we can find some answers in that. I would just say that there are a couple of dilemmas as far as we see it in Denmark. First of all, I mean, if you make a CO2 tariff, of course that will be regressive, but can you find ways to make it less regressive? I, for example, think that if you tax airplane travels, perhaps from the principle of those who pollute, they should pay, perhaps you could say that the first kilometers, they are not taxed, but those who travel very much, those who travel back and forth from the United States several times a year, that should be taxed more, so you have a progressive airline tax. Could that be a solution? That's one thing we discuss. And the last thing I would say to that question is another dilemma that we have in Denmark. We want 1 million electric cars by 2030. The logic in your report that we discuss here today is that, as far as I read it, is that you should tax the bad things, for example, gasoline cars, and then you should spend the money on supporting some of the green initiatives and also giving perhaps a tax break or tax relief to the poor to make sure that inequality does not rise. But if you tax the bad things, if you tax gasoline cars, I mean, the whole idea is that you want fewer gasoline cars. So we're going to have fewer gasoline cars, but that also means that we're going to lose revenue. So how do we make sure that we also have a budget balance and that we have the money to support some of the progressive policies? Because if we get rid of all the gasoline cars, we will lose a lot of income because we get a lot of income from taxing these gasoline cars today. That could perhaps, that's, I would say, some of the dilemmas that take up space in the Danish debate right now. And we haven't found the solutions yet, but we have pledged that we are going to find the solutions.
Great. Well, I think we're all trying to find solutions to various problems at the moment. So yeah, especially with the airline thing you mentioned, obviously air travel has gone down a lot in recent months. So yes, that could be an option now that we've seen the effects of less air travel on the environment, for example. Just to talk about the role of citizens, which obviously is a key, factor. We're talking about the consumers, those with lower incomes, those that are more vulnerable to higher energy prices in the report. But how can we effectively communicate to citizens, to those that see these higher bills? Perhaps some countries have that more than others, but how can we communicate that decarbonisation policies are necessary and that we need to offset the negative effects that they can create for some?
Nina, I think in Denmark, the European Parliament elections last year, that was the first climate election that we have ever had. I ran as a first timer, but I've been a campaign manager for a number of campaigns. I think climate change was basically #1 priority. I mean, it was the topic that took up the most space in all the debates that I went to. So I think that's the optimistic part, that citizens are really putting this on the agenda. The reason why we have 70% targets in Denmark is not because politicians just woke up and got a great idea one day. It's because that they know to get re-elected, they have to put this on the agenda. The citizens demand it. But basically, I think what you're asking, I'm not sure I can answer. It's really the great dilemma, because of course some people will get hurt by this when you make the transformations. The ones who work in the fossil industry, the ones who drive gasoline cars. But I think the report that we discuss here today has some of the answers, that you should basically compensate as much as possible those people that will get hit by this. You should tax some of the bad things, and then you should spend the money on helping reskilling people, making sure that they can afford an electric car, which they cannot today because it's so expensive. So you need to really subsidize. And I think that's also perhaps from a social democratic point of view, we cannot leave this to the market. The state, we need to bring the state back in to redistribute. We've seen in the last decades, the redistribution in, I believe, also all EU states has gone down. The state redistributes fewer resources than it did before. I believe we have to turn that development around.
Okay, thank you very much, Nils. Perhaps that's a good lead into Monique, whose organisation represents the voice of consumers across Europe. Monique, are you unmuted?
I'm not now. I'm unmuted. I don't know whether you see me now. I have a problem. I had a problem with my webcam, and
we can hear you. We can't see you, but
so well. I think hearing is maybe more important than seeing me.
Yes.
If that's okay. Well, I think that the colleagues from the technical support are trying to help.
Sure. Well, we can hear you. I think
Okay.
everyone can hear you. So just on what we were talking about there about consumers, obviously, I mean, it seems that consumer acceptance and engagement with the energy sector are going to be vital, really, for the energy transition success. I mean, they have to be on board with this. So how can Europe ensure that that happens, that consumers are on board and are engaged with the energy transition?
Well, yes, good morning. First of all, I'm delighted to be here, and I would maybe like to build on what Commissioner Simpson said. She said that we need to have more opportunities for consumer participation. And I would even go a step further. I will say we must have consumers participating in the energy transition, because if you really want the energy transition to be a success, you need to have all consumers on board. Because at the end of the day, it's the people who are going to make it. It's a little bit like with the pandemic. It's because people have respected massively the instructions, but also very much in their private life, of lockdown, of social distancing, that we have been able to flatten the curve, certainly in Europe. And that's true also for the energy transition. If you want the energy transition to succeed, you really need consumers to be engaged. That means they need to live in energy efficient houses. They need to use renewable energy solutions. They need to provide their flexibility to the grid. They need to use energy efficient appliances. And it's really key to have them on board. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. And what is very important is that consumers want to do that. There has been a Eurobarometer survey last year that showed that 9 out of 10 Europeans want the energy policy to deliver clean, affordable and secure energy solutions. But you cannot really let that rest on the shoulders of the consumers themselves. You need to help them. You need to make the sustainable energy solution the easy one, the affordable one, and the attractive one. And what I also would like to say, you need really to bring it back to reality, because we very often use very complex terminology. You have then indeed a problem of losing your audience when it's not a non-expert audience. But sometimes it can be very cheap, straightforward solutions. For example, one of our members, Destasha, made a project where they offered consumers to install additional insulation on their boilers. Cost of the investment, €30. Savings, €135 per year. On average, of course. So that means that sometimes it's very easy and you just have to make it happen. There are challenges to have consumers on board. And for example, lack of stability of the policy environment. Consumers, because it's an important upfront investment in some cases, for example, when you need to retrofit your house. So it is very important that those consumers are confident, trust that the environment is not going to change. I'm living in Belgium. We had a disaster when it comes to the signals that were given to people that wanted to invest in photovoltaics, because sometimes you had a prosumer tariff, sometimes not, and it was quite a mess, and it is still quite a mess. It is also very important, of course, to help people access the funding. So we have already spoken about free loans or very, very, let's say, advantageous loans. And the funding is certainly key. And there a lot can be done under the renovation wave, for example, to trickle the benefits of the support down to the homes, to the households, but also as a priority to the low-income households. But what is also very important is that money is not everything. You need also to support the people, because energy markets become more sophisticated, they become more complex, they become decentralized, they become digital. And in fact, consumers need to be much more proactive than in the past. And they are not experts, and they are not necessarily having any appetite to become experts. And that's why it's so important that you provide them with tools to navigate the energy market in a fun way and in an easy way that helps them in a, let's say, to take quick decisions for their good. And what I also would like to stress is that it's urgent. We need to anticipate as of now, or even as of yesterday, that consumers need to participate Oh, I'm happy. I'm back again, visually at least. Consumers, you need to decide already now how to engage consumers, because we don't have so much time left in order to make this a success. And just maybe a private message to Niels, the lack of revenue, the loss of revenue by getting rid of gasoline cars, you can find it in a healthier population, because they want, there will be public health will also provide for profits because gasoline is out of the market.
Okay, thank you very much, Monique. There's been lots of really good questions coming in from our audience, some of which we've kind of covered already, but there is a good one here for the Commissioner, Kadri, if you're okay with that. The study obviously outlines the importance of considering the impacts of a package of policies on distributional effects. And obviously we've discussed the more particular impacts of specific policies and about aviation, etc. How do we make sure that the European Commission can assess in advance the impacts of the upcoming package of energy and climate policies for next year?
Yes, well, I'm not sure if I understood, but was it the question about impact assessments before the policy initiatives? And this is the must. Well, we will not launch any policy initiative before we have done impact assessment. And that's why sometimes it takes time, because, well, there might be around a great idea, but you have to, well, consider all the possible consequences. And at the same time, for some problems, there is already a solution available. We don't need any new initiatives, we just need to implement what is already adopted. And in that perspective, I think that that my predecessor, Commissioner Arias Cañete, did, and together with member states and European Parliament, of course, this clean energy for all Europeans package. This gives us lots of opportunities also to create regional electricity markets, to get rid of the regulated prices. And from where I'm coming from, I do see that well, those platforms, those opportunities for consumers to choose their provider, and also regional markets brings actually better prices, electricity prices, than smaller markets can offer. So we do already have those regional markets in some parts of Europe. Now we have to, well, from a European point of view, we have to invest heavily to the interconnections so that grid can accommodate the need of the higher need, significantly higher need of electricity that we foresee. And doing so, and also witnessing what is going on in the renewable electricity price-wise, this is a possibility that energy prices will not be a burden for our consumers. But of course, we can do a lot. We can help in renovation. We can help giving a technical advice. This is also part of our Renovation Wave initiative. How the households who have not done so earlier can get necessary technical advice. And then, of course, we can guide consumers so that if they buy any kind of equipment, then that will consume electricity, that they have knowledge how much it will consume. And doing so, this is already launched principle. They will save significant amounts of electricity all across Europe, and of course they will save money. Thank you.
Thank you. And Monique, this goes into really whether you really find that this topic is being adequately addressed in the Brussels policy debates. I mean, do you think that policymakers should go beyond the regional dimension of the just transition, say, and investigate the impacts on policy on households and income groups?
I would like to say I agree with what Christian said when he was giving his remarks. This commission takes it quite seriously, and I see that there is a lot of reflection going on how to include households in the equation, or in the projects, in the rollout of the just transition or the energy transition. What we are now not seeing yet, but maybe it's a little bit too early, it's the place, but I have been reassured by what Kadri was just saying, the place given to households in the renovation wave rollout, because it's very important, because there is a lot of very conceptual debate, and if that is going to be materializing in really helping, supporting people, the households, in making their homes more energy efficient or their appliances more energy efficient, being able to choose among very clear messages whether greenwashing has been out of the scope or be a much more difficult. That is for us a very reassuring message. So we just would like to really also maybe address the fact that it is important that at national level they walk the talk, because there is a lot of space given to the member states to roll out those policies, and it is key that also at national level let's say the consumer dimension or the citizen dimension is being built in, because otherwise you will have regressive policies and you will have a yellow vest effect. And I think the materialization of this energy transition, or the Just Transition Fund and the Renovation Wave, and sometimes Horizon 2020, but Horizon Europe projects that are linked to that, are a perfect opportunity for the EU to demonstrate to citizens that there is really added value of the EU for them. And I think it's well understood by the decision makers, and I just hope it will really happen on the ground.
Okay, thank you very much, Monique, and thank you for this discussion to all panelists. I will now give the mic back over to Bruce for his concluding remarks. Thank you very much. Have a good morning. Thanks, Bruce. Are you there?
I am, Nina. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for facilitating the interesting discussion on the important topic. Before we close, I'd like to thank the panelists from Eurelectric side. Thanks again, and invite you all to join us for the following events on ports, e-mobility, market forecast, digital and AI, grids, storage, and the ETS. Phew, that's a lot. But don't worry, you can find all the information on our website, and look forward to seeing you at those future events. Thanks again to the panelists and to Nina for moderating. Thank you and goodbye.